In the year 1137, in the town of Tikrit, in what is now Iraq, a boy was born into a Kurdish family serving the Zengid dynasty. His name was Yusuf. History would remember him by his title, Saladin, righteousness of the faith. The West simply called him Saladin. He wasn't born a prince. He wasn't born a warrior either. His father was a military governor, a capable administrator, not a legendary general. Young Yusuf grew up more interested in religious study than in swordplay, according to several chroniclers. He studied theology, law, and the Quran closely, and that religious education would shape his entire worldview later in life. His family moved between Damascus and Aleppo as his father's postings changed, giving young Yusuf exposure to the politics of the wider Muslim world early on. He grew up under the shadow of Nur ad-Din, a powerful ruler who had already begun calling for jihad, a unified struggle to push the Crusader states out of the Levant entirely. That idea, that Muslim disunity, was the real reason the Crusaders had ever succeeded, would shape everything Saladin did later in life. Nobody who knew him as a boy expected he would one day become the most respected enemy the Crusader states ever faced. This is the story of the Muslim general who recaptured Jerusalem and earned the grudging admiration of the very Christians he defeated. Saladin's rise began in the shadow of his uncle, Shirkuh, a general serving the powerful ruler of Damascus, Nur ad-Din. Shirkuh was sent to Egypt 3 times to fight over control of the crumbling Fatimid Caliphate, a rival Shia dynasty. Saladin went along, somewhat reluctantly, as part of his uncle's staff. When Shirkuh died suddenly in 1169, only weeks after finally securing power in Egypt, the position of vizier fell to his nephew. Many of Shirkuh's own commanders were furious. Saladin was young, quiet, and largely untested. Most people assumed he would be pushed aside within a year. Instead, Saladin outmaneuvered every rival around him, consolidating control over Egypt with surprising speed. In 1171, he abolished the Fatimid Caliphate entirely, restoring Sunni religious authority in Egypt after 2 centuries of Shia rule. He was no longer just a general's nephew. He was now the ruler of Egypt in all but name. He rebuilt Cairo's defenses, reformed the administration, and brought in scholars and engineers loyal to the Sunni cause. He also kept sending tribute and troops back to his old master Nur ad-Din, careful not to appear openly disloyal while quietly building his own power base. Egypt's wealth, its grain, its trade routes, its access to the Red Sea, gave Saladin resources no Crusader kingdom could match. His growing power also made enemies. The Hashashin, a secretive Shia sect the West called the Assassins, tried to kill him at least twice during this period. On one occasion, according to legend, Saladin woke to find a dagger and a poisoned cake left beside his bed as a warning, along with a note telling him he was completely within their reach. He survived both attempts and afterward made peace with the sect's leader rather than pursue endless retaliation, a pragmatic choice that was very characteristic of him. When his old master Nur ad-Din died in 1174, Saladin didn't stop. He marched into Syria and began absorbing the fractured territories once ruled by his former lord. This didn't happen peacefully. Saladin fought other Muslim rulers, rivals, and even former allies to unify the region under his own banner. Some contemporary critics accused him of using the language of holy war simply to justify conquering fellow Muslims. Both things can be true. He genuinely believed in retaking Jerusalem, and he was also a shrewd, ambitious politician who understood that unity was the only path to real power. By 1186, Saladin controlled Egypt, much of Syria, and large parts of Mesopotamia. For the first time in decades, the Muslim territories surrounding the Crusader states were united under a single ruler. Now the Crusader kingdom of Jerusalem stood almost completely surrounded. He besieged Aleppo and Mosul, negotiated marriages to cement alliances, and slowly turned former rivals into vassals. The sons of his old master Nur ad-Din accused him of betrayal, arguing he had stolen an empire meant for their family rather than earned one of his own. Saladin answered by framing himself not as a usurper, but as the only leader capable of uniting the Muslim world against a common enemy. It took nearly a decade of near-constant campaigning across the region before Saladin's control was truly secure. In 1187, a reckless Crusader lord named Reynold of Chatillon broke a truce, attacking a Muslim caravan and personally insulting the Prophet Muhammad's family. Saladin swore an oath to kill him personally. He got his chance sooner than anyone expected. He marched his army toward the Sea of Galilee, luring the combined Crusader forces away from their water supply and onto the dry, waterless plateau of Hattin. Saladin's forces set fire to dry grass around the Crusader camp, adding choking smoke to the heat and thirst already crushing the enemy ranks. The Crusader army, exhausted, dehydrated and trapped, was annihilated in July of 1187. Saladin captured the kingdom's king, along with Reynold himself, and personally executed the man who broke the truce. Nearly the entire captured Knights Templar and Hospitaller Order, the most feared fighting monks of the Crusader states, were executed as well, while most ordinary soldiers were simply ransomed or enslaved. Even more devastating for the Crusaders, Saladin's forces captured the True Cross, the most sacred relic in the Crusader world, believed to be a fragment of the cross of the crucifixion. It was the single most catastrophic defeat in Crusader history. Within months, city after city surrendered. There was almost no army left to stop him. On October 2nd, 1187, Saladin recaptured Jerusalem itself, 88 years after Crusaders had first taken it in 1099. When Crusaders originally took Jerusalem in 1099, chroniclers described the streets running with blood. Saladin did the opposite. He allowed most of the Christian population to leave the city peacefully, in exchange for a modest ransom. Thousands too poor to pay were freed anyway, at Saladin's own expense, according to multiple accounts. Churches were largely left untouched. Christian pilgrims were later permitted to visit the city under Muslim rule. Saladin's own brother, Al-Adil, reportedly asked for and freed 1,000 captives out of personal generosity, adding to the wave of mercy shown that autumn. This single act of mercy did more for Saladin's reputation across Europe than any battlefield victory ever could. News of Jerusalem's fall shocked Christendom and triggered the Third Crusade, led by some of Europe's most powerful kings. Among them was England's King Richard I, remembered today as Richard the Lionheart. The two men became each other's defining rival, though historians now agree they likely never actually met face to face. There are famous stories of the two exchanging gifts and courtesies even amid the fighting. Saladin reportedly sending Richard fresh fruit and snow-cooled water when the English king fell seriously ill during the siege. Richard won a brutal siege at the port city of Acre, then a decisive field battle at Arsuf, pushing Saladin's forces back. The siege of Acre had its own dark chapter. When ransom negotiations for nearly 3,000 Muslim prisoners stalled, Richard ordered them executed outside the city walls in full view of Saladin's camp. Saladin, in turn, executed Christian prisoners in his own custody, a grim tit-for-tat that historians on both sides have always found difficult to fully justify. But neither side could land a final decisive blow. Saladin's forces shadowed Richard's army for months, skirmishing constantly, but avoiding another open battlefield disaster like Hattin. Richard twice marched within sight of Jerusalem's walls, and twice turned back, unwilling to risk a siege he might not be able to hold. By 1192, both leaders were exhausted. Richard needed to return home to deal with problems brewing back in England. The two sides agreed to the Treaty of Jaffa, allowing Christian pilgrims safe access to Jerusalem, while the city itself remained under Muslim control. Neither side got everything it wanted. Both sides had proven the other could not simply be crushed. It was, in its own way, a rare medieval example of two exhausted powers choosing a negotiated peace over endless war. Saladin died just a year later, in March of 1193, in Damascus. When his treasurer checked his personal finances, they discovered he had almost nothing left. He had given away his wealth to the poor throughout his life, so much that there wasn't even enough gold left to properly pay for his own funeral. His brother reportedly had to cover the remaining costs himself. Saladin founded the Ayyubid dynasty, which would rule Egypt and much of the Levant for decades after his death. But his legacy went far beyond politics. In the Islamic world, he remains a symbol of unity, restoring Sunni authority and reclaiming Jerusalem after nearly a century of Crusader rule. Centuries later, in the 20th century, his name was revived as a symbol of Arab and Muslim resistance to foreign domination, invoked by leaders across the region. In the West, despite being the Crusaders' greatest enemy, he became an unlikely symbol of honor and mercy, celebrated in medieval European poetry and later literature for centuries. Dante himself, writing decades after Saladin's death, placed him among history's virtuous non-Christian figures in the Divine Comedy. Centuries later, writers like Walter Scott and Gotthold Lessing would cast him as a model of tolerance and wisdom, sometimes more generous than the historical record even supports. Few military commanders in history have been so deeply respected by the very people they defeated. That was Saladin in 10 minutes. What did you think of this episode? And if there's a historical figure you want us to cover next, let us know in the comments below. We'd genuinely love to know. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.